Welcome to the Bridging Theology podcast, which connects scholarship to Christian life. Bridging Theology is hosted by Doctors Beth Stovell, Claudia Herrera-Montero, Kevin Hill, Ryan Reed, and me, Candace Smith. Now here's Claudia.
Thanks, Candace, and thank you for listening. I am Claudia Herrera.
And I'm Beth Stovell. Our goal today is to introduce you to the hosts of the new Bridging Theology podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So, Claudia, let's begin with a little icebreaker question. Tell us one interesting thing about yourself most people wouldn't know.
I remember that when I was writing dissertation, it was so overwhelming at some point that we decided as a family to do movie night and to establish movie night on Friday nights. And we loved it because we saved that sacred space to stop everything we were doing and just have a movie night with pizza and popcorn and enjoy as a family. And even until these days, we do it even if I finish dissertation. Every time it's like, we have movie night. So we love doing it. What about you, Beth?
So some people know this who know me well, but most people don't know. I actually used to take dance lessons and I used to be a dancer. Like I didn't compete a lot, but I actually had a dance partner all throughout university. And so I used to dance, Lindy Hop. I do merengue and salsa. I do all different kinds of swing dancing. I even used to do the things where they do aerials where they throw you up in the air. And I used to be able to do those things. And so I think there's a video somewhere of me being thrown into the air from my university days. And I still dance anywhere I am. Grocery store. I think I danced in a bookstore one time. It's just, part of who I am. And what about you, Ryan? What's something about you that most people don't know?
I think maybe one thing is just my background related to our podcast on theology. I come from a long line of pastors, theologians. My great grandfather was a lay minister in the Salvation Army, and my grandfather was a pastor. My dad is a pastor to this day. So I have kind of that long history with theology. So, Kevin, what's something about yourself?
So I asked my kids this, and they said, the I thing. And I asked, what do you mean by the I thing? And then it clicked. Oh, yeah, I remember what they're talking about. So a few months ago, I was playing with my dog, and I bent down to pick up his toy that he's playing with, and he ran full speed and hit me right in the eye head first.
Ow.
And for 2 weeks, I had my first black eye caused by my dog.
Yeah, I think I actually had a meeting with you while you had a black eye. It was...
Yeah. I got a lot of questions about that. Are you okay? Everything okay at home? Yes, it was just my dog. How about you, Candace?
Wow, mine's not as interesting, but I'm like the DIY queen. I love crafting. I love designing and making things. So kind of like Claudia, it's my creative outlet. I like to do pottery, as well as painting, different things like that.
Wow, that sounds wonderful. And I'm a witness to that. I've seen such a wonderful art from Candace when we were working together in ministry.
So let's move on and talk a little bit about how we came to do theology. We're going to talk a little bit about what we research and why we love it. And so I'm going to start with Claudia. Tell us a little bit about your journey into theology and why you love what you research.
Well, I am from Bogota, Colombia, and my undergraduate degrees are in political science and international relations. And I was always involved, though, in faith-based university groups in social justices and service to the community. So when I came to the United States with my family, I was called to be formed and serve in pastoral ministry, particularly campus ministry in a Catholic Hispanic institution of higher education. At the same time, as an immigrant Latina, I learned to be the other and meet the uniqueness of the lived experiences and the social context and faith tradition of the other, particularly my very own students. So the lived experiences, along with the pastoral ministry experience, with my students, among my students, moved me to pursue doctoral studies in practical theology and to answer and to ask critical questions about what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a first or second generation Latinx student or student of color in the United States? That was the main reason, but I just needed to study theology in order to be able to answer those critical questions. So this experience, along with my pastoral ministry experience, allowed me to study theology. And that's why my work centers around participatory action research on the lived experience, social context, and spirituality of college-age Latinas. Actually, my doctoral dissertation is understanding contemporary practical Latino theology through the lenses of college-age Latinas in their 20s. And that work moved me to listen to underrepresented communities in South Florida and as well as in the United States. So I love about my research because, first of all, it's very personal to me. And also it departs from my own experience. And therefore centers, again, on the lived experiences. The lived experiences of the people are the locus theologicus, are the point of departure to do theology in the academy, in the church, in the classroom.
I love, Claudia, how personal it is to you and how your own journey through as an immigrant and in that experiencing the other really gave you like a heart to learn about what are the experiences for other young women, other Latina women, and their how this is framed in their theology. Like, I love that there's a reciprocal aspect to your research that's from who you are to others, but also to hear from others, to learn from them, which I think is how participatory action research works, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because it actually look at the people as active agents instead of just objects of learning or objects of research. It looks at the people as active agents. It has a sense of agency in the academy, in the church, in the society. So yeah, thank you, Beth. Candace, how about you? Tell us a little bit more about your journey.
So my journey was a little bit different. It kind of took me a little bit by surprise. So initially, my undergraduate degrees in psychology and elementary education. So I was set on, I'm going to be an elementary school teacher. That's what I'm going to do. I switched it from wanting to be a or a Spanish teacher originally. But then it was like, I had this call experience. I don't know. I mean, Beth, I know you're familiar with the call in the Pentecostal tradition, but I really felt like as God was calling me to ministry, like the preaching ministry, I wanted to make sure that I was equipped. And so I went for my MDiv. And while I was there, my professors really were talking to me about pursuing, like, maybe you really should go further and pursue theological studies, like advanced theological studies. And I wrestled between if I wanted to do New Testament studies or if I wanted to do something different. And practical theology won out for me because it was just a way to be able to bridge the gap between my degree in psych as well as the study of religion. And so I love the social sciences. It's always been a big part of my heart. And it was kind of like the perfect balance. And much of my research centers around Black women, Pentecostal Black women. Specifically, my dissertation was on that, Pentecostal Black women in formal theological education. So just kind of examining the experiences of these women, what brought them, their journeys to bring them there to study, but also how they want to faithfully live out. And I think that it's just like Claudia, it's very personal. To me, I do see my spirituality or my academic research is kind of like an extension of my spirituality. And so, like, I love focusing on issues of embodiment and identity and how that impacts our spiritual, but also our civic engagement. So, what about you, Ryan?
For me, yeah, I guess for all of us so far, it's been a surprise. Like, I wanted to be an architect my whole life. I probably watched too many rom-coms or something like that growing up or something. But I was always into art, and it seemed like the practical way to make a living as an artist was to be an architect. I think it's a hard road in some ways, but so that was my goal. I was dead set on that. And then in my senior year of high school, I took college. My church offered these we flew in a college professor, and he offered this class on early church history. And it was the best class I'd ever taken. I just loved it so much. And I just remember we talked about docetism and Gnosticism and all this stuff. And I just thought that was the world to me. And I just wanted to keep doing that. I wanted to keep thinking about that. So I applied to Moody Bible Institute. I knew that they had, at the time, I think they still do. It's tuition paid. Like if you get in, it's just room and board, and I got in, and I was concurrently working on my architecture portfolio, and I just never submitted that to the university I was going to apply to. And then I just kept going with it. I wrote on my college application that I wanted to be a theology professor. I was really sold on that. And so I've kind of been pursuing that path ever since. My research is in the area of Reformation studies. I wrote on John Calvin, and I wrote on happiness and flourishing in John Calvin. And I wrote on that. I guess everyone here is this will bring out the knives, but I think that happiness is the most important topic. I mean, God and happiness, I guess bringing those together is that a person could think about. And so that's why I wanted to do that. Initially, I wanted to do it. I think I mentioned this to you, Beth, on death in Calvin, because I was kind of in a dark space when I was starting my research. And my mother was like, that's a terrible idea. And she was right. And I thought, what if I knew there's this deep Christian tradition of thinking about happiness. And I thought, I wonder if that's there in Calvin, because I was interested in Calvin. And it was. And so that's kind of what led me to that. So I'm still very passionate about that. I do still think that maybe one of the most important questions a person can ask is, what is the good life and how do I live it? And that's what I want to keep researching and thinking about as long as God enables me to. So, Kevin, what about you?
Yeah, like some of you, my journey into theology was a surprise. I had been doing my first year of commerce at a university, and I decided, since I was a new Christian, I wanted to take a year off to study the Bible and scripture just for my own sake, and then I'd return. At least that was my plan. Mm-hmm. But I remember taking an introduction to theology class, and as a class, we read Athanasius's work on the incarnation of the Word. And somewhere along the way, that book just sunk its teeth into me. I ended up going out of the commerce degree and into this theology program, and I just kept going. Many years later, I actually write on Athanasius and the early church, and I do so because I love this period. I think that there's just a richness. It's colorful and vibrant in terms of who God is and what God's doing.
Hey, Kevin, I don't know if you know this. I don't think I've said this to you before, but actually Athanasius on the Incarnation is actually part of the love story between me and my husband. So my husband, John, is a systematic theologian, and I'm a biblical studies person, as y'all know. And I was taking my first full-fledged theology class, and I was talking about how do we think about the incarnation for the class. And I just started dating John, and he was like, you got to read Athanasius. And so we read Athanasius together and took notes together, and he talked to me about it. And I was like, wow, this guy's awesome. Both Athanasius and John. So I sometimes jokingly say Athanasius has, kind of helped me fall in love with my husband. So anyways, so I appreciate with you Athanasius and on the Incarnation.
That's an amazing story. And he's kind of like the bond of love between you.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, I'm really curious now, Beth, to hear what was your journey into theology and what do you love about your research?
Yeah. So, I mean, my story, it sounds like a lot of us actually were surprised to end up in theology. I, coming out of high school, thought I was going to be a pediatric neurosurgeon, and I wanted to be the top pediatric neurosurgeon in Austin, Texas. That was like my plan. And so I was doing pre-med, and along the way in my university years, I realized that God had a different call in my life, but I didn't know what it was yet. I just knew it wasn't to be a doctor, at that kind of doctor. And so I decided to do this degree that was a mixture of classics, where I was studying Greco-Roman history and Greek and Latin. And also I did a degree in English. But people would ask me at the end, like, well, what are you going to do with this? And I'm like, I'm going to sell fries. I have no idea. And so I was really praying about what's my next step, not really knowing what I'd do. And as I graduated early, I was encouraged to go and teach. And I had told God I will never teach. I would rather eat bugs in another part of the world. I will not be a teacher, because that would make me the third generation teacher in my family. And I had a very strong aversion to this. So God had to say, no, you're going to teach if you want to be obedient. So I ended up teaching high school and junior high for a while, and I loved it. I actually loved teaching, and I found out I passionately loved to teach. But I really wanted to teach seminaries, kind of what I imagined, even though I'd never been to one. So I ended up in a seminary as my next step. And God, through various circumstances, led me to move to another country, to Canada, which was a huge choice for me. I'd never lived more than 20 minutes away from my parents, and then moved to another country where I knew no one. So I went to Regent College, and even there, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. So I studied English and spiritual theology. And at the very end of my program, I was almost done. I was one chapter away of my thesis from graduating. I'd taken all my courses in English and spiritual theology. And my New Testament professor sees me in the hallway, and he stops me and he says, I want to talk to you. And I was like, okay. So I went to his office, and he said, I think you should be a biblical scholar. I think the Spirit says that you should be a biblical scholar. And I was like, does the Spirit know that I have a totally different degree that I'm almost done with? Like, does the Holy Spirit know that? And apparently the Holy Spirit did. And so, but at the time I had just met John and was dating my husband, John, and we were just married. So I was a little nervous. Should I go into this field of biblical studies? And part of the anxiety was I came out of a tradition where women don't teach the Bible. And there isn't, that women are not allowed to teach the Bible, that's not a thing that women are supposed to do, that it's ungodly to do that. And so I had this pretty strong struggle between the calling I felt from the Holy Spirit and the encouragement I was being given from, a scholar who I respected, and the tradition I'd come from and what it would mean to walk away, or at least question that tradition. And so I made the decision to do it. And I had the wonderful Professor Rick Watts, who not only was the one who said, the Spirit says you're a biblical scholar, but also was willing to mentor me through those first months of being very, very scared of what this meant. And so ultimately met my husband, and we went on to do PhDs in biblical studies. And now I love this wonderful work. And amidst all of that, I also had a professor, Maxine Hancock, who helped me to understand that a professor was someone who did teaching and research. I didn't even know that was the case. And so she was the one who called out and said, you should be a professor. And so it's been really powerful to come to where I am now. I didn't have any scope of imagination for this at all. Like, I didn't grow up with even the ability to imagine that I could do this job or this work. And so that's been kind of powerful for me in my own journey to get here. And then in terms of my research, I work in biblical metaphor. So I work in the relationship between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and how metaphor helps to connect that. And I love it in part because I love the movement between the Old Testament and the New Testament, how the story of the Bible builds. And I love to follow how these metaphors, especially the metaphors for Jesus, or the metaphors for the Holy Spirit, or the metaphors for the Father, how they build and change over time, and how they give us this rich understanding of who God is and what God wants to do in the world. And that we can trace that growth in culture to culture to culture as God speaks again and again in fresh ways, but consistent with who God is from the beginning. And I love that part of the work that I do. All right, we've had a lot of fun answering those questions, but now we're going to have fun, short, quick questions, a nice lightning round. So we're going to start with this. With the exception of me and Kevin, we all live in different cities all over the US and Canada. And so can each of you tell me what's one thing you love about where you live? So I'll start. I love that I'm right next to the mountains and we can go hiking. We hike in camp every summer for fun. So that's mine. So Candace, what about you?
So I just moved to Dallas area in Texas. So I'm still learning and trying to find the things that I like. But right now I like that I do get to have all the seasons now. So I get to experience all of them.
Woohoo. That's awesome. I appreciate that. What about you, Claudia?
I actually live in South Florida, but I live in a place that it's west of Broward County, very close to the Everglades. So the sunsets are magnificent. It's a prayer to me. So I love, one of my favorite moments is just go out and see how the sun sets and see the beautiful colors of the sky. And that's a prayer to me. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah. So I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which I think is very famous for the Amish. And I think that's kind of relates to what I like about this area is it's still kind of a lot of farming and pastoral, but there's actually, I think with all the tourism, there's a lot of things to do, and there's like restaurants and things like that. So it's kind of a nice mix of urban and rural, and I love that. My wife and I, we live on like a farmland, like we back onto a farm, but then we live about 10 minutes from, I don't know, lots of city things too. So it's a really nice mix. So that's what we like. Yeah, Kevin?
I'm going to steal a little bit from Beth and a little bit from you, Ryan. Here in Calgary, if you just hop in your vehicle, it takes you about 10 or 15 minutes to get two completely different views depending which way you're driving. If you drive south, you get these beautiful prairies like farmland. So you see the yellow fields and the huge blue sky. So very much like what you described. But there's also in the other direction, there's the rugged green forests and the gray mountains. So I find driving in either of those ways kind of helps reset me and put me in a better frame of mind.
Wow, that kind of connects with my experience, Kevin. It's just, it reframes us. It put us in a different set of mind, a reflection. I love what you're describing. Now let's move to this question. Can each of you tell me what is your favorite movie or your favorite film? And I will start. There's so many movies. My daughter wants to study film and TV production, and that's why we are fascinated with film. And so, but at this very moment, I love Encanto. Encanto is a new movie from Disney, and it takes me back to my culture, to where I'm coming from, to Colombia. But not just in one culture. It's just all the beauty of all the amazing experiences and cultures and food and sayings, dichos that we have in our country. So I love that movie, and I've watched it like 3 times. And every time I watch it, I cry. So I love that movie. How about you, Candace?
Yes, I love that movie too, Claudia. It made me think about you and just our conversations watching it. But my favorite movie, like I guess hands down all-time favorite, which was so hard to pick, is The Matrix. One, I love Keanu Reeves. I just love him. But also I just like all the different themes. So like when I watch movies, I usually like have conversations with God about different movies. I guess that's the practical theology in me. But every time I watch it, I get something else, like a new revelation. So I really like it. What about you, Beth?
Oh, this is so hard. Because there's days when it's Sense and Sensibility, the version that's directed by Ang, and it's just beautiful and quiet and lovely in this really powerful way. And it does this beautiful job of picturing family relationships. But there's other days when it's like Shaun of the Dead and it's like a romantic comedy with zombies. And then I think the one I'd actually have to say is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think I'm cheating because it's 3 movies, but I could watch that over and over and over again and probably have watched, I don't even know how many times I've watched those movies. I just adore them. So, yeah. So, what about you, Ryan?
Yeah, it seems like we all struggle with this question. I agree with you, Beth. Maybe that is my favorite, like just by watch number and what I enjoy the most, The Lord of the Rings. My wife and I watched that 3 times, all 3 of them during the pandemic. Like, so however many hours of film that is, like we'll literally watch it one time through and then we would start all over again. And beyond that, I think I really like. It's I don't know if it's like very sophisticated, but I love Jurassic Park. I think that's it. I think one of our hosts, the guests that we've had on the podcast, love that too. But yeah, that's an incredible movie, I think. So
we got to watch that in the theaters with our kids, and it was so fun to watch their feet like jump up when there's scenes where you like, I remember doing that in the theater when I was a kid, and then watching my kids have that same response. So fun. So what about you, Kevin?
Well, now I don't know what to say. I guess I've got to admit I've got the same favorite as Ryan. I usually don't rewatch movies, but I love Jurassic Park. And there's one scene in particular that just really sticks out. I really love when the paleontologists who've studied dinosaurs for their whole careers see one in the flesh for the first time. I just think that's such a wonderful analogy for the life of a theologian in the life to come. And I also love the music. I mean, who doesn't?
I love that you made that theological. Like, I never thought of it as theological. That's so great.
I'm usually a very shallow movie watcher, so that's like the one exception.
It's like the vision of God or something. It's like an analogy for Thomas Aquinas.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. It's a theophany.
Brontosaurus as a vision of God. I love it. So can each of you tell me, if you could take an all-expense paid trip somewhere without worrying about pandemics and whatnot, where would you go? So for me, I realized I didn't think ahead about the answer to this question. Probably the one place that I planned on going and I haven't gotten a chance to go to is Seoul, Korea. So I'm someone who adores Korean food, Korean culture. I even started learning Korean, and I watch a lot of Korean dramas and listen to Korean music. And so I've wanted to go to Seoul for a really long time, and we actually planned, I think, 3 or 4 years ago to go to the international trip that didn't work out, and then since then we haven't been able to go. So that's probably where I would say. What about you, Candace?
So I'm torn on this question. I really want to go to South Africa because I've been to West Africa and I just want to kind of see the differences. And there's several places that I want to visit in South Africa. But because it's so cold right now and I'm not used to the cold anymore, I would love to go somewhere warm currently. So anywhere in the Caribbean right about now would be great.
That's amazing.
What's the temperature there right now? I'm just curious.
It's 20.
Oh, that's actually really cold.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, they shut down a Chick-fil-A today. But they shut down like everything. The city the dart's not running or anything. So yeah.
I just love the sentence, they shut down a Chick-fil-A.
Yes, I was so sad this morning.
It's not Sunday, like kind of thing. Like, yeah. Anyhow, yeah.
What about you, Claudia? Where would you go?
I'm like you guys, I didn't think about that question. And then I'm in between different places. One of the places that when I was in college, I had the opportunity to do an internship in Mexico City. And the first place that I visited was the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And it was very powerful to me, like as a point of departure of my own story. I didn't even imagine when I was there that I was going to be a theologian, that I was going to write about Guadalupe, that I was going to write about Mary, Latinas, in the academy, in the church, practical theology. So I really would love to go back as a theologian. We are our whole body, like even if we're on vacations, it's embodiment. So I would love to go as a theologian, and at the same time as who I am, go back and visit that same place that I visited, I would say 17 years ago, when I was expecting my daughter, Mariana, in my womb. And I would love to go back with her and with my husband and be there and just be still and be there. So that's the place.
That's awesome, Claudia. What about you, Ryan?
Yeah, we're all torn. There's a lot of places I'd love to go. I would go to Norway is where I would go. I have kind of, I guess, like my lineage that I was mentioning before. My paternal grandfather was from Norway, and he was such a proud Norwegian. He would always talk about Norway, and he just drilled it into us. And I think it would be very beautiful too. And so it's something I've always wanted to do, is go to Norway. So that's where I would go. Yeah.
Awesome. What about you, Kevin?
So I'm torn. It would either be Istanbul to see Hagia Sophia, or I would love to go and see Alexandria and Cairo in Egypt. So I think I'd let my wife decide. Either of those would be fantastic.
That's so cool. Every time I hear Istanbul, I hear the song Istanbul, Constantinople. I don't know why that's like that. I know it's a place and I shouldn't just have a theme music for it, but somehow that's what I think of. But I know it's beautiful. So
more cities could use a theme song.
Okay, yeah. We could write theme songs. It could be part of the podcast. What do you guys think?
As long as you're singing them, it's all good.
Yeah.
And you can do some dancing for it too, right?
I could. No one can see it because it's on the podcast, but I'll be happy to dance in my booth here. So,
Kevin, do you think that's like your interest in that has to do with your work as like an early church historian? Those cities?
Yeah, for me, so Hagia Sophia would be almost like a pilgrimage, because I had a very powerful experience in the Vatican years ago, and I think I would have something similar there. And Alexandria would be because that's where Origen and Athanasius are from. And then Cairo's right there. I'd love to see the pyramids, because who wouldn't?
Yeah. Cool.
Wow. What you're saying, Kevin, just reminds me that when I thought about Jesus, teaching about Jesus made me realize that I don't just want to go to Holy Land as a pilgrimage, but I really want to go to Nazareth, like to that little town of his mother, So that takes me to the next question. I would love to hear from each one of you. If you could have coffee or tea with any historical, biblical, theological figure, who would you choose? And I will start. I will have coffee with Ada Maria Isasi Diaz. She has been my conversational partner in theology since the beginning. She's no longer with us here, but I would love to have coffee with her. But also, I would love to have coffee with Mary of Nazareth, the mother of Jesus, the mother of God. How about you, Candace?
So, again, I had a hard time, but if I could have coffee with anybody, it would be Queen Candace in the Bible, in the book of Acts. I've just been doing a lot of like research with my family, just tracing my roots, and like naming is important. And so I just would like to kind of hear a little bit about just her life experiences. I know that Candace was the equivalent of like the Pharaoh title. So it's a dynasty of those women, but I would just love to hear more about their stories. And then also the other person would be my third great grandmother. So I've kind of, I guess, hit a wall with my research there. So just to be able to have a conversation and to learn more about her parents, so I can continue my research. What about you, Beth?
It's interesting. That made my initial answer was going to be Julian of Norwich. She is somebody I love. She actually brought me from a pretty dark place in my university years, where I kind of was walking away from God to some degree. I was in a really deep space of kind of asking, where is God when people hurt? Like, where is God in suffering? And I was in a class on feminist writing, and we read Julian's work, and she just brought me back to a space where I was like, oh, I can hear God again. And so she is definitely somebody that I would love to sit down and have a conversation with, pet her cat, just talk to her about her experience with God and her visions. But the other person that what you brought to mind, Candace, was my dad's mother died when he was really little, and I have always wanted to know her. I look a lot like her. That's actually, I don't really look as much like my parents. I look like her. And her family was from Israel, and she has like this whole experience in life that I don't know anything about. And so sometimes I just think it would be beautiful to just get to sit down and chat with her and have a coffee or a tea together and hear more about her life. So what about you, Ryan?
Yeah, so I thought about this, and I don't know. I feel like there was no exception clause here, but I feel like maybe I'm taking the exception. Honestly, I would like to meet with Jesus, if that's allowed, if we're allowed to say that. I think I'm teaching this class on Jesus Christ at my church, and I'm just really, he's our savior, and I would like to, who else would I like to meet with? Yeah, so I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I don't know. It's like the Sunday school answer, but that's.
He's a pretty biblical theological figure.
Yeah, it's kind of like kind of seems important. If that's not allowed, I would probably choose. Again, this is going to be very cliche maybe, but probably the Apostle Paul. I think sometimes our faith, at least the faith I've grown up around, is maybe overly Pauline, but like he still has shaped, the majority of the New Testament, and there's so many passages that I would love to just, what did you mean by this? And like, why, like, what was that? What were we supposed to get out of this? How do you read these Old Testament texts? Like I would have so many questions that I'd love to ask him. So those are two figures I'd be interested to meet with. Kevin, who would you want to meet with?
Well, I guess now I don't know how to top your first.
Jesus and Paul.
Yeah. So since I've taken the obvious,
I can't talk. No matter what I say, I'm going to look like a heathen, right? So I might as well embrace the borderline heresy and say Origen of Alexandria.
Oh,
absolutely. He was brilliant. He was saturated in the scriptures, but he was also devoted to the pursuit of God with his heart and his mind. And I think I could just learn so much from him. He'd be so fascinating to talk to. And he had such an impact on the later Eastern theological tradition.
Still not as good as Jesus, wow. I would say. Sorry.
This isn't a competition, Ryan.
Wrong answer.
I would like to meet with God. Anyone want to compete with that?
I'm the only one that wants to meet with Jesus on this podcast. So,
Origen would agree with you, Ryan.
Well, I want to meet with the mother. So
fair enough. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. How about if we move on to one last round of questions, this time about our involvement in the show. So Beth, how did you get involved in Bridging Theology? What does this podcast matter to you?
Yeah, so I was trying to remember exactly how all of this started, but I'm pretty sure it came out of a conversation that I was having with Kevin. So Kevin and I don't remember how we got in touch with each other, but Kevin realized that we were both theologians, both in the same city, both cared a lot about how do we connect to theology to the church. And we started having this really thoughtful conversation about, what would it look like to have a podcast that did that kind of work? And I think initially too, we were having some conversations just about like, how would the two of us connect to do stuff together, which was also really cool. But that was, as I remember it, that's how I got involved in it. And the podcast matters to me. Actually, I was just talking to a friend at lunch today about why this podcast matters to me. So a few different things. I think at the heart of my calling is a real desire to share the things that I've learned and the things I'm learning from others with the church, with people in the pews or in the, I don't know what words we would say, but like people in congregations, just the everyday Christian, and feeling like there's not that many ways that we can share. And I wanted to share kind of the big picture of what God is doing in terms of internationally and across disciplines and across different traditions. So I was so excited for our podcast to have that kind of reach and grasp. So I'm excited. And the people we've been interviewing have thus far, I know this is the first time people are hearing this, but we've already been interviewing people and it's been so profound. I've gone away from the interviews feeling just so excited about, if the five of us ever hear this, I'll still be excited because it's been such a beautiful experience. So what about you, Candace?
Yeah, so I think it was a conversation that you and I were having, and you were telling me about the podcast, and it was really interesting, and it sounded like something that I wanted to do, and I've been looking to do podcasting for a while. But this particular one, my story, I guess, is a little bit similar to yours. I'm a fourth generation. Well, I was raised as a fourth generation Pentecostal. And there's historically within my tradition, just kind of a disconnect between the church and the academy. And I have been very intentional about just my commitment to bringing the skills that I learned, the tools from my theological studies back into the congregation. So just making sure that I'm a resource and can kind of empower and also help others who may take up that journey to kind of bridge that gap. So I think that the podcast was perfect, not just for my tradition, but even for others. And kind of like what you said, it's been amazing to hear the journeys and the research of so many others. And it's making theology more accessible. Like I always say, the university or the academy should make sure that they're impacting the communities around them. So I think this is one way that we're helping to do that. What about you, Ryan?
I guess kind of going to the surprise theme, it was kind of a surprise. Some of the other podcasters, you all knew each other for a while. I was following Kevin on Twitter. I like some of the things that he was saying, and he threw it out there. And I had been thinking about wanting to do a podcast. I said, I'll just message him. And I'm one thing I didn't mention, I'm a dual citizen. So I'm Canadian US citizen. And so I immediately connected with Kevin just around Canada and some different things. And so I was interested. And then kind of our team started forming. And so it's been really exciting. And then the mission too, I definitely am really excited about the mission of what we're doing, of being this, we talk a lot about inters, all the different inters that we are. And we're interdenominational and we're really exploring different connections, I think, on this podcast and trying to connect it to the church. And that's something I'm really passionate about. Like like I mentioned before, I'm teaching a class in my church right now. I really want to be really involved in the church. And so to do something that connects academic theology to the life of the church is really exciting to me. So kind of those two things. So yeah. Kevin, what about you?
Yeah. So I don't work in the academy, And I'd been out of writing and researching for a little while. And I really was starting to miss being part of a community of students or scholars, just people who are engaged in trying to love God with their minds. So I started reaching out on Twitter, as you said, Ryan, and some other networks. And the podcast kind of developed from there between conversations with Beth and with Ryan and then some others. The podcast matters to me because there's often perceived to be a separation between the head and the heart. And I don't think that's actually the case for a lot of people. I know a lot of intellectuals who also have a vivid Christian faith. And I hope that these types of people, when they hear this show and hear experiences from scholars and others about integrating faith and the mind, I hope these kinds of people can be encouraged to continue to be true to who God made them and continue to dig deep intellectually and continue to connect what they're learning to their faith and then live out what they've learned. I know some people, they worship through dancing and jubilation or singing, but you can also worship, I think, through the inner life and through study and reflection. And I think that's okay as well. So I really hope that we can encourage intellectual Christians of all types to continue to be who God's made them. And I hope that we can also continue to have an awareness of how the Holy Spirit is moving internationally and interdenominationally throughout various intellectual communities and throughout various churches. Claudia, what's your story on this? How did you get involved, and why does this podcast matter to you?
Well, first of all, Kevin, thank you for your words, because that is my experience, and that's something that I try to talk with my students and among my students every class. This is not just pure intellectual knowledge, but how can we bridge our knowledge with our faith, with our heart? And so thank you for reminding us of that. So I was thinking about the beauty of community, the beauty of relationships. Everything begins with relationships. I am my relationship. So when I was thinking about this answer, I thought about Beth and how she was a professor at the university where I was the director of campus ministry. And at the same time, I was doing my PhD in practical theology. She was a great mentor. And then over time, we became great friends and colleagues, and we got to publish together and even go to ARs together and establish traditions in AR, all of that. So
there's a baby Jesus drink that, we can tell a story about at some point.
So we became friends, we became colleagues, and then with those friendships and colleagues, you get to work later on. And so I was invited by Beth to be part of this podcast, and she said, Claudia, this is this great podcast that we're putting together. So as a Catholic practical theologian, my work always sat in the margins between the church and the academy, in light of my experience. And I say in the margins because I am a woman in the church. I am a woman in the academy. So a woman in the margins of those two worlds. So I think it is important to continue opening spaces where those two publics of theology encounter. And I don't say they bridge, but encounter, like a culture of encounter. Pope Francis talks about a culture of encounter, encuentro. It is important to reflect of how much the lived experiences of our faith communities inform our theological thinking, and how much our theology converses with what happens at the core of our communities of faith. And so I am excited about this opportunity. I'm excited, as Beth said, about those conversations, critical conversations that have made us also think about new ways of dialogue and interdisciplinary dialogue that will inform ultimately our communities. And the three of them, the church, the academy, and the society. So yeah, thank you.
Something I love about that, Claudia, and I think that we might all say this, one of the gifts of doing this so far has been building relationship. And so some of us have, like Candace and Claudia and I all know each other for years. I think we're almost at a decade now, actually, of relationship with each other, which is really exciting. But it's been so beautiful, actually, to all get to know each other. Like getting the times when I get to spend time with Ryan, with Kevin, and like, well, all of us, I think, have been talking about how meaningful it is to get to know each other as part of this process. And so I didn't say that, but I actually think that's part of why the podcast matters to me as well. So, and I can imagine that's probably true for some of you guys too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've enjoyed sharing with you about who we are and why Bridging Theology matters to us.
And we hope that you'll join us in our future podcasts as we interview theologians who represent broadly different theological traditions and disciplines and diverse locations across the globe. And all of these different theologians we're interviewing, they all want to be part of how we bridge theology. And so we hope you'll be with us through that.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, visit our website at bridgingtheology.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to it in your podcast player, rate it, or share it with others. This episode was produced by Kevin Hill.